Morning, Michael.
Morning. There you are.
Yeah, figuring it out.
Opening up the page on Kindle. Well,
I'm a little late, sorry.
I just sent an email. I'm feeling fine, but still pretty congested. So as I say, I did not want to inflict myself on anybody. How you doing, Steve?
I'll tell you when we get done.
Okay.
How I'm doing is a work in process.
Good to see you, Steve.
Oh, good morning. I think as just a suggestion, in terms of the measurement of the sukkah, referring to last week's session, you talked about hand breadths or something like that. And hand breadth,
Yeah.
we know is about 3 feet or 3.5 feet, you know. It's just confusing using a word that we don't use every day in our language to indicate a measurement of something. So maybe you could just use 3.5 feet as a substitute to hand breadth.
You mean inches?
Pardon me?
You mean 3.5, 4 inches?
Yeah, whatever the measurement is.
Yeah,
Because
I understand.
in our brains, we can actually understand what we're talking about because this biblical language is meaningless to us.
Got it. Okay, so you're saying you prefer...
Unless you lay carpet by hand breadths as well.
No, so again, that's easy. We can just say 4 inches. Is that good? We'll just say 4 inches.
That's great. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay, so that we'll work with that.
So sorry, I'm a little late. The synagogue didn't send me the link in time, so I'm now here, ready to work for the hour with you.
Steve, this is yeshiva. When you come late, you get detention. You're gonna have to stay late this time.
Okay.
Um,
For you, it's yeshiva. For me, it's Palm Beach life.
Steve, I was wondering, did you get the email with the specific?
I got the email. I got the email with the synopsis of this week's work. Yes.
Amazing. Okay. Amazing. So let's get to it. So last week we kind of finished off kind of in middle of a topic, and this topic will run until the next Mishnah, which is coming up pretty soon. So what we were discussing is someone that's sleeping or using a bed in a sukkah, and this bed has some sort of canopy, some sort of covering.
A 4-poster bed. I have one in the bedroom, right?
Exactly. So we were discussing that, and Shmuel, he's the one that said that it's okay as long as it's not 10 times 4 inches or 40 inches high. It's not 40 inches high, then it's going to be fine. And we had some questions.
I have to tell you, my 4-poster is higher than 3.5 feet high.
Okay, good. It's good it would be hard to sneak in if not.
On the other hand, Tani, it's not something I drag out of my apartment into a sukkah.
Okay, good. I don't know. Maybe you take off the roof in your house and you just put stuff on top. I don't know.
Remember,
I don't put anything past you.
On my honeymoon, my wife and I went to Yugoslavia. That's what it was called at the time. And we got to a hotel in Split, which was the most modern hotel there. And the air conditioning didn't work. And it was so hot in the bedroom at night that I took the mattress off the bed and I dragged it out onto the terrace. And we slept on the terrace all night.
Okay. So you have some experience with this.
Yeah, I understand right there.
Okay. So let's get back to it. So he discussed about having this canopy over the bed. So we're gonna pick off. It's gonna sound like a new topic, but you'll see how it will come back. We're holding Rav Tachlifa.
Where are we now? Are we starting with 11a?
So right before the 11a is the end of 10b.
Right.
On the same page. I put it on the same page.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rav Tachlifa, the son of Abimi, he said in the name of Samuel, the name of Shmuel, was the same person, said that if someone sleeps without clothing in a canopied bed and his head is outside of this canopy, so he's allowed to read the Shema. And we spoke about this last week. I mentioned briefly, just again, that when someone says the Shema, which is a mitzvah every day to say the Shema in the morning when someone goes to sleep at night. So there's based on the verses, which we're not getting to now because it's not really the topic, a person has to be covered. He can't be with his private parts exposed.
How about if he wears a kippah and he's naked?
So that doesn't help. Doesn't help. The person needs to be covered. That area at least to say the Shema. So the discussion here we're discussing is if this canopy that's over his bed is considered considered an area, or is it considered, we can look at it as like clothing, it's just a covering. So if we consider the area under it significant, if this is a significant area, then it would be an issue because it's not clothing now, it's just his body's exposed in an area, in some open space. But if it's not significant enough to be its own space, then we could consider it clothing, and therefore he would be able to say the Shema. So Shmuel, we see here, he says that if you have your head out of a canopied bed, it's okay. We don't consider it a significant space, and therefore the sukkah, not the sukkah, sorry, the Shema could be read at that time.
So you can be lying in a 4-canopied bed, stark naked, as long as you stick your neck out of the perimeter of the bed, the canopy.
So yeah, that's what he's saying. I do want to clarify that. I'll clarify this at the end.
One more thing. I know I'm going to drive you crazy, but stop rocking back and forth. You look like you're in a boat that's about to capsize.
Okay. All righty. So that's what Shmuel said. They asked on him though. It says in a Mishnah or Brisa. Let me just check quickly which one. It says in a Brisa that if you sleep in a canopied bed without clothing, then you can't put your head out of it and just read the Shema. So it's a direct contradiction. Shmuel said you could. By being in a canopied bed, it's considered clothing, not its own area. And this Brisa says that no, you can't do that. You can't just stick your head out. It's good because your body's not covered. It's in an exposed area.
One second. Come in.
So the Gemara answers, no, that's simple. Based on what we learned last week, it'd be easy answer. That's canopy.
Yeah. RSVP. I have to excuse myself for a second.
I do so many Zoom calls, I'm accustomed to this.
Yeah. I wanted to clarify, I guess, before Steve comes back, this would be something interesting to clarify. There's many different types of bed that we were discussing here, and we're going to discuss soon. The wedding one, whatever they call it, the bridal bed. So the way I understand it is that there's two types, two categories, and then Steve, I was just giving you just a good background information, I guess, is that when it comes to the beds, there's two types of canopy beds. Last week we discussed the A-frames or the 4-post ones, but besides for that, there's the way I understand the difference is that there's ones that are part of the actual bed frame, and then there are ones that the poles are just added. It's not part of the bed frame. You just kind of put them around the bed, almost like you set up a tent over the bed, not that it's actually part of the bed itself. And therefore, those are obviously less permanent than the ones that are actually attached to the bed frame and are part of the bed frame. will come up soon. I just wanted to give that introduction. Okay. So the Gemara answers about the fact that could you stick your head out of this canopy or not, and say the Shema. The answer. So he says, the reason why the Brisa says you can't stick your head out is because this canopy was over 10 times 4 inches, over 40 inches high, and that's why he wasn't able to stick his head up, because if it's over 40 inches, that's for sure a significant area. And therefore you can't consider it clothing, because the space over there is significant. Which he uses answer in the last week also. And Gemara says, I even have a proof for this, that this is the case, that we're talking about a canopy that's higher than 40 inches, because the Brisa says, oh, if you're going to stick your head out of a canopy bed and say the Shema without clothing, it's the same thing like being in a house without clothing and sticking your head out of the window and reading the Shema.
Tani, I have a question. What is the significance of this 40 inches? I mean, it sounds like we're talking about pygmies here, trying to sneak into a bed that's 40 inches high. I mean, I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, so it's not first of all, we're talking about 40 inches over the mattress, not over the floor. But
okay.
But it's still small, but it's more about we're learning the theory behind the law, not it's not so practical always.
I want to understand what's the significance of the 40 inches.
The 40 inches we discussed in previous pages. The Gemara dedicated like a full page and a half, trying to figure out where this 10 inches comes from, and we discussed that. But the main idea is that the conclusion was that 40 inches is considered a significant amount of space, and therefore it can be considered a tent in many areas of halacha that would come up.
The discussion that we,
for a house that need. Sorry,
I was just going to go back, with Steve, the discussion that we had a while ago when the 10 handbreadths or 40 inches came up was in the context of what would be the minimal space needed for something to count as even a temporary shelter for by any definition. And then there were some examples given from that got a little bit convoluted with the covenant, the Ark of the Covenant, and the tabernacle. But the 10 was like a bare minimum, but still counted as a usable shelter, not a livable house, not something that you might build, but still something that could serve as a shelter.
So Michael,
that's what the discussion was.
So Michael, you remember the 40 inches as a minimum distance where the canopy is over the mattress. It could be more. It could be 90 inches.
It could be anything, but as you get higher and higher, that's where it became, the question arises, and I think Tani's going to be getting to that. At what point does it become a genuine shelter and have to be considered like a house? At what point do you have I guess if you went up beyond the 20 amot or 20 times 18 inches, that had some significance for what was considered permanent versus temporary. So there were long discussions of what all of that was. But as I think, we'll see there on the tent, the V-shaped tent or inverted V-shaped tent, that seemed to be okay. But when you got over the 40 inches height of that V-shaped tent, there was discussion. Well, is this still okay? Is it not okay? So I promise you, I wish it were straightforward, but it's more complicated than that.
Well, Michael, that makes sense, because the V-shaped tent is more reminiscent of a pup tent from the army
Yeah,
and or an an outdoors adventure tent. But is there a maximum amount of a distance that the tent roof can be over the mattress where it in fact becomes a permanent residence?
that was one, and I'll ask Tani to give us the real answer, but there was a discussion that went back and forth. When you don't have a flat roof, when you have the V tent, some argued, no, it doesn't matter. It can be more than the 40 inches. Others said, no, once you get above 40 inches, you've still got a problem. So it was, like I say, opinions on either side, but I don't have to worry about it because Tani is going to give me all the answers as to what the final version was.
Yeah. Stephen, it's like every anytime you ask a question in halacha, it's always like, there's a few opinions about it. It's not literally, but like that's what it always feels like. And we're going to see at the end of this Gemara, we're going to have one opinion that says no matter what frame, no matter what type of tent, it's going to be fine in a sukkah, no matter what the height is. But the law won't be like him. If you want the actual law, it's really based on everything we're going to learn today. So how about let me hold that off until we get to the Mishnah, until we get to the next Mishnah, and then
I'm not going to try to guess who killed the person in the story. Okay, we're going to go along gently, and you're going to tell us at the end, right?
I'm counting on that.
Let's get back to it. So again, we said that if the canopy was the reason the case where you're not allowed to stick your head out of the canopy and say the Shema is only if it was 40 inches high over the bed. It was less, but when he said it's okay, is because it was under 40 inches, and that's why you could consider it more of a covering for him, clothing, not its own just area of space, of ear space. And it brings a proof for this from the fact that it compares it to being in a house, and it says obviously you can't be in a house unclothed and put your head out of the window and all of a sudden say the Shema, because when you're in a house, for sure the house is considered its own ear space, significant enough to be considered its own space. It's not a covering. You can't consider a house a piece of clothing. So from the fact that it compares it to a house, it shows us that it's obviously talking about a case where there's significant. There's something significant here. There's a significant space. So just like a house is significant. So to hear this canopy, we're talking about a canopy that was significant, meaning that it had the 40 inches that we spoke about. Okay, so the Gemara says this is conclusive. It's a good proof. If you're comparing it to if the Bryce that compares it to a house, then we must be talking about where there's significant amount of ear space. But the Gemara clarifies. Now we're going to 11a. The Gemara clarifies that when it comes to a house, even though we compare the two, there's a difference. A house is even more, obviously, is considered more significant than a tent. And therefore, even if the house isn't 10 handbreadths high, meaning it isn't 40 inches high, since the house itself is permanent, has walls. I mean, I'm picturing like a brick house, but whatever, it's a house. It's something very permanent, then it's considered its own space, even if it's not 40 inches high. And therefore you would not, in the case of a house, you would not be able to stick your head out no matter what the height of the house is. So in very short, we're saying if it's a tent, so then you have this 40 inches difference. If it's 40 inches, then you can't. If it's less, you can. But when it comes to house, since it's even more permanent, even if it's under 40 inches, you still can't just stick your head out.
Yeah, I think. I was going to say, I think that the issue that confused me originally, but you explained it, I think earlier, is that there are two issues going on. Actually, there are three issues going on. One is the permanence issue. Does permanence, even though nobody's living in a 40-inch or less house, the point that was being made is that if it is a permanent structure that includes the tenting, that is considered to be a legitimate shelter. If it's temporary, that's not not considered a shelter. If it is, then the other point was how big is it? If it's too tall, like the 4-poster bed over, I'm sorry, like the 2-poster tenting over 40 inches, then some people would argue that it's the height that's making the difference, while others would say with the 4 posters, well, a 4-poster bed is a permanent structure of a bed, and that's going to be bad under any circumstance. So we've got multiple considerations between permanence and height. And like I say, somewhere down the line, you're going to give us the conclusions.
Exactly. We'll summarize it all at the end. We'll have it very clear. So here we go. So now we're going to, a lot of times, because Gemara literally means tradition. It means it was passed down. It was orally in a way of tradition until it finally gotten written down in an actual book. So sometimes they had different versions of what was passed down. So meaning we quoted this all in the name of Shmuel, in the name of Samuel. Now we're going to have, it says another version of what he said. And it's going to be a little different wording. Sometimes the two versions contradict each other. And it kind of got lost in the tradition and, got confused. Someone must have confused it down the line. And there were two versions. But sometimes it doesn't contradict. It just talks about a different case. But it still aligns with what was said before. So in this Gemara, it doesn't contradict. It aligns. It's just a different case. And I'll try to make it clear how it's a different case. So again, another version that Yehuda, Judah said in the name of Shmuel, says, permitted to sleep in a bridal bed in a sukkah. Why? Because it has no roof. Even if it's more than the 10 hammers, even if it's more than the 40 inches. So what's the case? I want to clarify. We never spoke about this case before. A case where it's a 2-post, and it's a 2-post that's not attached to the bed, like I mentioned before. So you have it's not fixed, it's not permanent in any way because it's not even attached to the bed. It doesn't have a real roof because there's no handrail, there's no 4-inch wide roof ceiling to at least consider it some sort of roof. So therefore, because it has those factors, therefore he says it's no matter what the height is, even if you go over the 40 inches, it's still not going to be considered significant enough to be its own area, and it would be okay to sleep in such a bed that had this bridal bed. And I guess, just from a very practical standpoint, I guess it's a bridal bed, like it's a regular bed. Just for the wedding, they added this, canopy. It's not part of the bed frame. It's just like something they set up, not attached to the bed frame temporarily for the wedding. But
Tani, did you tell me that you got married at the Colony Hotel?
I did get married at the Colony Hotel, yes.
So when I had a meeting there 2 weeks ago, we're in the middle of Sukkot, and I had dinner there once, and I called Moshe and I said, listen, it happens to be Chol Hamoed Sukkot. I'm going there for a meeting, but the greenery in the outside restaurant is like a sukkah. Do I make a bracha l'shei b'sukkah when I sit down at that meeting? And he said it all depends on whether the support of the sukkah in that location is permanent or not.
Interesting.
So I went to the meeting and it was not permanent. So I made a bracha.
Very interesting. Okay, I'd love to see a picture of that area. Is it still there?
Take your car and go there.
Okay, it's still set up like that. It wasn't a temporary.
If you make a reservation for dinner, you wouldn't eat dinner there, but I would. If I make a reservation for dinner, that's where I would sit.
Got it. Okay, I'll go check it out. I'm very curious to see. I don't want to say anything about it until I see it. That's very interesting.
Interesting.
We'll have some clues when we get to the Mishnah today. The new Mishnah will have some clues about such a case. Okay, so again, so we're talking about a very temporary canopy over the bed. Again, it's not attached to the bed. It's not. It doesn't even have a even 4 inches of flat ceiling. Rather, it's a pure A-frame or V-frame, however you want to call it. And therefore, he says, no matter what the height is, it cannot be considered significant enough to be not in the sukkah, rather you're in some other tent. It wouldn't be considered that. Therefore, you're fulfilled the obligation of the mitzvah of sukkah. So the Gemara right away asks, so rather this doesn't contradict anything we said because it's a totally new case. We never spoke about a case where it wasn't attached and it was a V-frame. The other cases we spoke about is it's attached, 4 posts that are attached or 2 posts that are attached, or a 4-post that's not attached to the bed. We never spoke about a 2-post that's not attached to the bed. And that's why it still aligns with everything he said before. Okay, so the Gemara asks, it says in a Mishnah, I think, let me just check quickly. No, in a Brisa, it says in a Brisa, someone that sleeps in a canopied bed in the sukkah has not fulfilled his obligation.
Tani,
So
what's the difference between a brisa and a mishnah? I don't know what a brisa is.
So a Mishnah is Mishnah. I'm sure you heard of what a Mishnah is. That's a classic.
The mishnah is the introductory paragraph to a Talmud discussion.
Exactly. Now the Mishnah, where did the Gemara get these Mishnahs from? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or Judah the Prince, he was the first one to write down the oral law. It used to be just passed down mouth to mouth. And then he was the first one who said it's necessary, we're going to lose the tradition. So he wrote it down. But because we weren't really supposed to write it down, he wrote a very, very concise book of Torah law. So that's what these Mishnahs are. They're very short.
Right.
And there were too short. And that's what the Gemara had. That's what the Gemara had to expound on them. That's the Mishnah.
What's a brisa?
So a brisa is what didn't make the final cut, if that makes sense. It's the stuff that he didn't put into the actual written book of the Mishnah, but it still stayed part of the tradition, part of the oral tradition. So they still had a lot of these brisas, which have the same authority of the Mishnah. They were authored, meaning they were the opinions that are discussed in the brisas are the same people as the Mishnah. So it's the same level, so to speak, of authority. It's just didn't make the final cut. The word brisa literally means outsider, like it's outside of the Mishnah.
Okay, now I understand. Thank you.
Amazing.
Michael, sorry if I ask all these questions, but
No, as a matter of fact, Steve, you asked a question that was a variant of something that confused me as well with the when I was speaking with Tani about the brisas. Are just like the Mishnah is written down now, is there a book called the brisas, where you can go in and look them all up and see them in written form, because obviously at the time they didn't make the written version, so they came in an odd way. And like right now, Tani, is there a book of brisas?
That's a very good question. There actually is. There's no book of all the brisas. For example, this one you won't find necessarily in any book, but there are books of brisas.
that's a good question. Michael has a good question. If there's no brisa on the subjects that we're studying the Mishnah of, how do you know what to talk about with us?
How do I know? What do you mean?
Yeah. There's no guidelines. No guidelines.
No, the Gemara is the they're the ones that the Amoraim.
They
That's the
capture
name of
it all.
They analyzed every line of the Mishnah, and
Got it. Okay.
they're the ones that have commentary on the Mishnah. That's the real guidance.
Yes, that was another interesting point that again we talked about early on. It was confusing to me, but apparently you say, how do you know what's going on? And part of that had to do with the authority, the folk who put together the Mishnah, the people who were the first generation, second generation, third. As you go farther and farther back in the generations, what they have to say becomes more authoritative. Now, since so many of them have similar names, I gave up long ago trying to figure out who was from which generation. But when people are looking at these huge sets of commentaries and trying to figure out, well, where, what is the real story, what's the most authoritative, they're typically, anyway, it seems that we go back to the earliest version as having the most likely authority. And the Bryces are just part of that way back, has a lot of authority if you can actually figure out what they are. So that's part of the deal.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about the book of Bryces. So there isn't a book of all the Bryces, but there are books that that people wrote. The early Gemara, the early Amoraim, the early Gemara sages. Some of them were, either, like you said, last generation Tani, or their teachers were from the Mishnah at times, at least. So they were some of them that decided to write down a lot of Bryces, but not all of them, obviously. One of the main one that accompanies each tractate has an accompanying book of Bryces to it, and that book is called Tosefta. Tosefta means addition, very similar to Tosfos. Tosefta, which means the addition. So almost every tractate will have a Tosefta with it.
The equivalent of footnotes.
Sorry?
Right. It's equivalent of footnotes.
No, I wouldn't. No, because it's not lined up necessarily with the Mishnah itself. It's just like, it's almost more like when you ever go on Wikipedia and it gives you like external links. Like if you want to read more about this topic, just without it's not going to fit in a specific place. That's what the Tosefta is. It's just available for you.
Sorry, the interruptions, but as I told you, or the rabbi in shul, this is my first time in 70 years that I'm doing Talmud, so I got a lot of questions.
Good, it's good. The Talmud wouldn't exist without.
Yeah, I'd say two things, and I'm going to repeat something that Tani said to me as well. I mean, I too am not, obviously, I only know about Talmud very, very superficially. So I promise you, I ask a ton of questions as well. And we're just starting at different points in the book this time. But what Tani explained to me was that however many times he's gone through this, and others have gone through this, and the people who do the Talmud constantly, doesn't matter, because you're always going to find something new. You're always going to find something confusing. You're always going to learn something different. And it's only by discussing and rediscussing and hearing a novel question that you get to that next step. And unfortunately, where sometimes you find out who killed the guy, in this case, you never get to that final step. There's always more questions, no matter how much you do it. So I would encourage you, from my perspective, ask all your questions. Tani will have to put a lid on both of us at some point.
Okay.
Amazing. Yeah. Definitely. There's a saying. I think it's in Pirkei Avos. It says, "I learned a lot from my teachers. I learned even more from my friends, my contemporaries. But I learned the most from my students, meaning from their questions, from etc." So that's very, very big part of learning. Okay, so we were holding the fact that someone that's in a canopied bed. Again, where it's not attached, and it doesn't have 4 inches of flat roof space. It's no issue, and you could sleep in such a bed during Sukkot. We asked. There's a brisa. Okay, now that we know what a brisa is, there's a brisa that discusses a case of sleeping in a canopy, and it says he did not fulfill his obligation. So how could Shmuel say that you can fulfill your obligation in a canopy bed? So we're holding where it says here, and it's towards the end of its line. The paragraph is another version. The line we're holding is here. So he answers, here we'll deal with a case which has a roof, meaning we discussed he's saying I was discussing a case where it was just two posts with no, it's just an A or V frame, with no actual flat roof. But the brisa that you brought and you asked on me from is really just talking about a canopy, but but it's talking about a flat canopy, one that had four posts. So you can't. It's not even the case I was dealing with. So you can't ask me from that. So the Gemara says, you know what? We're gonna still pack it on. Come in here. Yeah, which we discussed what this expression is. Come in here means it's going to bring a source that's more authoritative, which we just Michael touched upon that. Let's say the people in the Gemara times, which their names are Amoraim, that's the category. Anyone that's from the Mishnah times is considered more authoritative, so they can't argue with anyone from the Mishnah times. Or for sure, if you bring a verse that would contradict something that one of the sages said, that would for sure be a question. So whenever you see the words "come in here," it means it's bringing a more authoritative source to either question or to support whatever was said.
Where is "come in here" in this text?
If you printed out the papers that I sent you,
it's "come in here."
It's 4 lines into the paragraph, another version. You have it, Steve?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, come in here. Naklitin. What is that? So it means a frame with 2 poles, or kinaifos, which is a frame with 4 poles. So if you spread a canopy over such a bed frame, so if it's kinofos, it's invalid. And kinofos means 4 poles. If it's naklitin, which is 2 poles, it is valid. Provided, meaning as long as the naklitin are not 10 handbreadths, meaning not 40 inches high above the bed. But if they are 10 handbreadths, if they are 40 inches high above the bed, then even the 2 posts, even the naklitin, are invalid. So, and the Gemara says, we're going to assume that this case is talking about where it says 2 posts. Because naklitin are 2 posts. It clearly says that, which means a frame, which means no flat roof, no real ceiling, no real roof here. And it still says that once you go over 40 inches, it's invalid for a sukkah. That directly contradicts what Shmuel said. Shmuel said a 2 post could go even above 40 inches, but here it clearly says we're talking about a 2 post. We're talking about naklitin, and it says that as once you go over 40 inches, it's invalid. So that's seemingly a very strong question on Shmuel, on what he said. So here, this is where this is what I mentioned before. It's important to have that in mind. Naklitin, the Gemara says naklitin are different, since they are permanent. So you see this word naklitin. You haven't been following along the Hebrew, the Aramaic, so it's hard for me to point it out to you. But until now, we've been using the word kila. That's our Gemara word it's been using, kila. Now we spoke about naklitin and kinofos, and the difference I told you before is: are the poles attached to the bed frame or not? Are they part of the bed frame or not? So whenever we spoke about kila, the poles were not attached to the bed frame. But here in this source that we just quoted with the naklitin and the kinofos, those are actually attached. And therefore, the Gemara says naklitin are different since they are permanent. And that's why, even though it's a 2 posts, which means it's an A-frame, which means there's no real flat roof here, it's still going to be an issue in a sukkah if you're higher than 40 inches, because it's more permanent than the kilo, than the frame that's not attached to the 2 posts that are not attached to the bed. So the Gemara says, hey, let me follow your logic. If you just told me that this 2 post naklitin is considered permanent because it's attached to the bed, so why are they not subject to the same law as kinofos? why aren't they treated as fully permanent? Just like the kinofos, we said, it doesn't matter the 40 inches or not. Even if it's under 40 inches, it's permanent. It's significant. So too, the naklitin, you're telling me it's permanent because it's attached to the bed. So then we shouldn't care about the 40 inches or not. Once you're considering it permanent, then you have to consider it permanent all the way, seemingly. So to that, the Gemara says no. Well, it's compared to kinofos. When you compare the bridal canopy, yeah, meaning where it's not attached. All right, 1 second. Compared to kinofos, they're not considered permanent, but compared to bridal bed, they are considered. Yeah, sorry. So when you compare the two posts, the kinofos, which are not klitim, are actually attached to the bed itself. When you compare that to the 4-post one, okay, it's not as permanent as 4 posts. 4 posts has a flat roof. It's a more permanent bed structure. But if you compare it to a bridal bed, where it's not attached to the bed frame at all, then it would be considered permanent. In other words, it's all relative. That's what it's saying. It's relative. What's considered permanent? So if the poles are attached to the bed frame, and there's 4 of them, meaning it's a flat roof, then that's very permanent. That no matter what the height is, even if it's under 40 inches, it's going to be an issue. If it's attached to the frame, but it's only 2 posts, so it's a step down. It's not as permanent. And therefore, the only way to consider it its own structure is only if it's over 40 inches. Now, if it's not attached to the bed, then if it's 4 poles that are not attached to the bed, then it depends if it's 40 inches or not. If it's over 40 inches, it's significant. If it's less, it's not significant. But if it's 2 poles and they're not attached to the bed, then it's never considered significant. It's never considered permanent enough to be considered its own structure, and you could sleep under such a canopy. So it all works out. Again, we have 4 types of beds, 2 that are attached, 2 that aren't, and then within those 2 categories, there's 2 posts, 4 posts, 2 posts, 4 posts, and that's what would decide if it's kosher.
Steve, I think this brings us back to, as you were talking about it, to the issue that you brought up concerning the colony hotel setup. And that is, since these are not black and white as to how permanent, not permanent, what it means, doesn't mean, I can see that presents some interesting questions, and I understand why Tani would want to eyeball it himself just to get a feel for what that version of temporary was. But just when you think things are getting clear, there's always another layer of complexity.
When I hear Tani discuss what he's reading to us here, there comes the joke of, when 2 Jews speak, you get 3 opinions.
Exactly. That's what we're about to have here. We're about to have a whole new opinion.
Yeah, if it were only 3 opinions, it'd be easy.
Amazing. So let's get to the Mishnah here. Rabbi, the son of Rav Huna, expounded. It is permitted to sleep in a canopied bed in a sukkah, even though it has a roof, even though it's 10 handbricks high. And this we never saw before. So on to say that you can have a flat roof, which in other words means a 4-post bed. You can have a 4-post bed and go higher than 40 inches, and it's still kosher. A whole new opinion. He totally doesn't agree with this whole idea of a bed, a canopied bed being an issue in a sukkah. So Gemara says, where does he get this from? According to whom is his opinion expressed? Who does he fit with here? Seemingly, he doesn't fit with any of the Brisas, any of the Mishnahs we quoted earlier, because they definitely said naklitin, all these things they can be an issue. If it's 40 inches, not 40 inches, whatever. But at some point there's an issue, and here he says with the roof over 40 inches, it's still fine. Where does that come from? So he says the Gemara answers it's according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Judah, who said that a temporary tent cannot nullify a permanent one. What does that mean? In other words, when you're in a sukkah, what are we discussing? We're talking about a case where you're in a sukkah. I'm in a sukkah. What do you mean I'm not in the sukkah? you're under a canopy, so you're in something else, that's in the sukkah. So the question is, can we, like again, we keep on seeing, can we consider that other thing significant enough? So in his mind, he says, or Rabbi Yehuda's mind, or Judah's mind, there's no such thing. If you have a temporary tent, that can't get in the way and take you away from being in something which is more significant, more permanent. So a sukkah, again, even though a sukkah is not necessarily so permanent, but compared to these bed frames, obviously it's more permanent and bigger and etc. So therefore, the sukkah is significant. It's so significant that whatever you're going to put under it it's not going to be relevant. It's not going to be. We're not going to consider it at all to take you away from being considered being in a sukkah. That's his opinion. Again, a temporary tent cannot nullify a permanent one, meaning it can't take you away from bringing in a permanent one if you're in just a temporary. Where does Rabbi Yehuda say this? As we have learned, Rabbi Judah said, we were accustomed to sleep under a bed in the presence of the elders, which is an interesting expression, what exactly that means. But the point is, they were, let's say, young students, and they wanted to, I guess, hang around. They don't want to just go to like the hotel down the road and miss something, So they found a spot for themselves to sleep under the beds in the sukkah during the holiday of Sukkot. So the point is that he's obviously the fact that the elders didn't say anything, that there's any issue of them sleeping under the bed. It means that being under some sort of canopy, or under some sort of structure within the sukkah is not an issue. Now this is only Rabbi Judah because that's his personal story, but everyone disagreed with it, and we'll get to that Mishnah later also. So don't worry. But so from that Mishnah we see that Rabbi Judah says that a bed or any other type of canopy is not permanent enough to take away from being in a sukkah, and that's who Rabbi Huna was saying his opinion like, according to this Rabbi Judah. So then the Gemara has a very simple question. This is like a very typical Gemara question. So you want to put that perspective on. He says, if all he's saying is that he's agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda, all he has to say is, why does he not say halacha is as Rabbi Yehuda? Halacha is like Rabbi Judah. Why does it sound like it's his own opinion, like he's adding something to the conversation? He's not adding anything. All he's saying is, don't go like that, Mishnah, rather go like Rabbi Judah. So why does he not do that? What is he adding to this conversation? And this is a very typical question the Gemara will ask. If someone is saying something that it's already said in a Mishnah, the Gemara will right away ask, why are you saying that? It says it in the Mishnah already. Like we don't need you to say that. Why are you adding this? Or what are you adding? It's a very, very common question the Gemara will have. And it's whenever you read a Gemara and you'll see someone saying something and it sounds the exact same as something that was mentioned in the Mishnah, right away it has to trigger, light bulbs have to go off. You have to say, hey,
that's a logical thing, because just because somebody says it doesn't mean it's true.
You're saying it's logical to affirm something that was said before.
I mean, when you hear somebody say something, is it valid or not valid? I mean, that's the whole question, and you can always debate. I mean, it's from what you say to the rabbi's sermon or anything. I mean, how do you know it's valid or not? I mean, no,
that's a very good, Steve. You bring up a very, very good point. So something we mentioned before in previous classes is there's a certain cutoff between the Mishnah and Gemara time. And Michael referred to this a little earlier. There was like a big cutoff. Anyone that was before this cutoff time is considered more authoritative than anyone that lived after that time. Meaning, in other words, someone that was part of the later generations of the Gemara times cannot argue. He's not allowed to. He has no authority to argue on anything that was said in the Mishnah times.
Cutoff time.
There was a big cutoff time. And there's one person we mentioned, actually, I mentioned this to Michael earlier. There's one person that the Gemara sometimes will ask a question, how could you say what you just said? The Mishnah says otherwise. And as a last resort, it says, this one guy who lived literally at that bridge, point, he was a student of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He was a student of the author of the Mishnah, like an older student. So they sometimes say, oh, he's different. He's considered, the word is Tana. That's the name of the people of the Mishnah, the sages of the Mishnah. He's a Tana. He could argue, but anyone after him is not allowed to argue with the Mishnah. It was like, in other words, to put it in like a perspective, the Jews collectively accepted the Mishnaic sages or the Mishnah itself as law, and that's it. There's a person has no authority to argue on the Mishnah. It was agreed upon. This is the law, and that's it. So therefore, it's a big cutoff point. So anytime, let's say again, like back to our case, if he's just saying the law is, if he's just agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda of the Mishnah, so just say the law is like Rabbi Yehuda, or a different case where someone just says a statement that was already said in the Mishnah, the Gemara will right away attack it, like, what exactly are you trying to add? For sure, if he contradicts the Mishnah, that for sure is an issue. But even if he's agreeing with it, right away, light bulbs have to go off in your brain. Seemingly, I just read that in the Mishnah. What is he saying? And you have to, then you'll realize, oh, he must be saying something different, and then you pay attention to the details, and you'll see, it was a new case. It was something different. That's just a tool to put in your toolbox. That you always want to make sure that if you're seeing something that was already said in the Mishnah by a Gemara, from the Amoraim, from a Gemara sage, you right away have to figure out what's different. If the Gemara doesn't ask that question, then you have to ask that question and see, what did you miss? What detail did you miss that you didn't realize?
Yeah, of course that responds directly to this. Just to expand on that a little bit, what Steve was saying, how do you know what's right and wrong when people are having an argument? And Tani and I were talking about, or he was explaining to me more precisely, the issue of, for example, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, two big schools of thought. They had lots of discussions, they had lots of disagreements. Somehow or other, there was a decision made that one or another seemed to be the prevailing correct opinion. And figuring out why one or the other was the prevailing correct opinion, when you read them individually, they both sounded pretty compelling in their own way. That's part of the whole array of Talmudic discussion that I'm still trying to get my arms around. But yeah, I think your question, Steve, is one that is a pretty straightforward one. When you have these disagreements, these ongoing feuds between schools, and people have pretty polar opposite opinions. How do you figure out who's right and who's wrong? Well, because you can't always, they both may be referencing the same stuff. So it's again, like we've been saying right along, more complicated than we'd like it, but it keeps things interesting.
I think what we just heard is who is right and wrong is there's a time cutoff. Otherwise, you can go back to Adam and Eve and say, oh, well, he said and she said, and then you never end the discussion.
Right. So exactly, Steve, that's what I wanted to say. It's interesting. When it comes to, first of all, when it comes to Gemara learning, theoretically, we don't, at the end of the discussion, you care about what the law is. But when you're actually reading the Gemara, you shouldn't be concerned what the law actually is in the end. It's more here, we just have to decipher what it says. But more than that, it's interesting. I don't know if people realize, but when we figure out halacha today, a lot of it is just really figuring out what previous generations looked at the law. For example, let's see if I can give an example. I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to think of an example.
Well,
I'm saying
in all they said, there's a precedent. Meaning
exactly. So you're always looking for a precedent instead of trying to make a new law. Like Steve was saying, decide what's right and wrong. Rather what usually a rabbi will try to do is go back to earlier sources, earlier generations, and see how they or like to look what they already decided the law is, instead of reinventing the wheel. It's more about finding out how they decided the law should be. That's usually the concern. it's interesting, but that's what like the rabbis today are not looking for. When it comes to the law, Jewish law, they're not looking for what's right or wrong, what opinion they think makes sense, and just knock off. Very few rabbis have the confidence and are really capable of doing that.
What do they want?
Like one or two or three in a generation, maybe not even. So that's really what they're really looking for always, is just to find the what the previous generations have already decided the law is, and try not to contradict with them. They find clues to see what they decided. Okay, let's get to the Mishnah, and then we'll stop with that. I know it's 11 o'clock already. Let's just finish up with the Mishnah. So again, the question was, he's saying that you're allowed, that being in a canopied bed is not an issue, no matter the height, no matter how many posts there are. So seemingly all he's trying to say is that he fits with Rabbi Judah. See, we're just going to get to the Mishnah here. He fits with Rabbi Yehuda, who we quoted the Mishnah, so they used to sleep under the bed. So what's he adding?
Divine, right? That's the way you're reading, right?
I'm holding. Sorry, what are the words?
Bottom of the page. If you train divine.
No, not if you train divine. No. I want to get until there, and then we'll stop. The last few lines of the paragraph before that. The Gemara asks, why then does he not say the halacha is as Rabbi Yehuda? That's the question we ask. You see me just repeating his opinion. So the Gemara says like this: if he had said just the plain words, the halacha is Rabbi Yehuda, I would think that Rabbi Yehuda was a unique case. What was unique about his case? I would presume that this applies only to a bed. Why only on sleeping under a bed is okay? Because a bed is made to be slept upon, meaning what you make a bed for is the top of the bed, not for the space under the bed. You make a bed so you can sleep on top of it. You're not really considering or thinking about the space under it. But a canopied bed, what's the whole point of the canopy? Is that you should be able to sleep under the canopy. So here, the canopy is made for the space under it. And therefore, the space under it might be considered significant because it's actually made to be a tent. In other words, a bed is not made to be a tent. A bed is meant to be slept on top of it. But a canopy is made to be a tent. So maybe a canopy would be different. And Rabbi Yehuda was only talking about a bed. That's what I would think. So therefore, he informs us, reason Rabbi Yehuda, that it is like this. Not that because it's a bed and it's not made for it to be a tent. Rather, it's because it's a temporary tent cannot nullify a permanent one. No matter whether it's an ordinary bed or a canopy bed, it's always going to be okay in a sukkah because it's more temporary than the sukkah itself. In other words, he's agreeing. He would want to say that the law is like Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda only spoke about a bed, a regular bed, and they slept under that. He wants to say Rabbi Yehuda would agree, or would say the same thing, even a canopy bed, meaning you're on top of the bed, but there's a canopy on top. That's why he decided to say what he said. It's different than the case of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so that's again in summary. We kind of went over it. There's this one opinion that the law is not like this, by the way. This last opinion about any canopy bed is fine. The law is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, it's like Shmuel. What did we say? Again, it depends if it's attached to the bed or not. If it's attached to the bed and there's 4 posts, that's the most permanent. That's the most extreme. It's never okay, no matter what the height is. If it's not 4 posts, only 2 posts, then it depends what the height is. Okay, that's when it's attached.
Last question, going back to the Colony Hotel. If the canopy over the restaurant area is a canopy that has covering and is not attached to the floor, and it's not Sukkot, should I make leishei basuka when I eat there?
Yes, you're saying it's not attached to the floor anymore. The vines or whatever the
right.
Okay, so it's not attached. And what was the second detail?
I'm having dinner there on Purim. Do I make a leishei basuka bracha?
No, only on Sukkot do you make that blessing.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so that
I know
there's
you're
the
trying
other.
to wrap up. Just one other question. For the people who believe that Yehuda is everything's okay, but for the people who believe that the 2-poster V-shaped tenting is okay if it is less than a space of 10, less than a space of 40 inches. Using this case, now, as a stretch, is the area under the bed now, in this more stringent case, the area under the bed, is that considered to be the floor to the top of that less than 40-inch nafikim, or is that just
Let me see if I'm understanding your question. Are you asking where do you measure the 40 inches from? Do you measure from the floor, from the top of the bed? Is that your question?
if for the kids sleeping under the bed, where do you measure the 40 inches for those people who believe that the 40 inches makes a difference from the top of the mattress?
From the floor. You would measure it from the floor to
So then the
bed.
kids couldn't, for those people, sleeping under the bed would not be legitimate.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Wouldn't be okay.
I just want to make sure I was tracking on all of that.
Yeah, that's only Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. I can double check that later, but I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't be, meaning, in other words, today, practically, it wouldn't be okay really to be under a bed. Unless you're saying maybe if it's under 40 inches, but it could be a bed is considered permanent, like just like the kinofas.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, if you have a bed that's, for the people who are, feel over 40 inches is bad, forget it. But for the people who figure that under 40 inches with the fikim, it's okay. I was just asking, it's okay for the 40 inches top of the bed to the top of the tenting. And then I was just looking at this, this example where if you have kids sleeping under the bed, is that no longer the proper measure?
Someone called me, so the audio went off for a second.
Oh, it was just like a way out scenario. I'm just trying to figure out how you determine where things are measured, but we'll pick it up with the train the vine next time.
Michael,
Yes.
I want to give you two examples, okay? In New York, I have a 4-poster bed that has a canopy, okay? In Palm Beach, I have a 4-poster bed without a canopy. So the question is, if I put a canopy on the 4-post in Palm Beach for Sukkot, and it's definitely over 40 inches high, is that a legitimate sukkah?
But that's a new case, Steve. You're talking about putting schach on top of the bed?
A schach on top of the posters.
Oh,
The posters,
well then you would.
the posters are already in place with nothing attaching the posters on the top. Now comes Sukkot, I say, aha, I'm going to put a little canopy on top of that.
Steve, you would need to take that bed outside first of all, but second of all, you would need walls. You would need to add some sort of walls to your bed also.
I see. Okay, got it. Okay.
Yep.
I can always drag it onto the terrace.
Yeah, you have experience with that.
You'd still need 2 more walls, or one more wall and a little bit of a wall.
Sure. Amazing. All righty. Okay, so good to see everyone.
Thank you very much.
Feel better.
Thank you. I'll look forward to if you trained a vine, and hopefully live and in person next time.
Bezat Hashem. All righty, everyone have a
Thank
great
you
day.
so much.
Thank
Take care.
Alrighty.
Thank you all. You're right.